Evidence of evolution. So, as an overview here, evolution is considered to be a unifying theme of biology because it ties together evidence and research from many different branches like paleontology or morphology or biogeography, even through embryology and biochemistry. These are all studies and fields of biology that rely on a centralized theme, and the study of them has evidence that is directly related to evolution. And so this evidence has become direct observation within all of these fields. Evidence in paleontology are fossils. You've been learning about them since you were little. These are preserved remains of organisms, things like bone, footprints, even feces. You should see an example of that in my classroom. The fossil record reveals a history of these types of organisms that have lived on Earth a very long time ago. Even now, it includes extinct species, and we can now even age fossils. Transitional fossils, those link ancestral species together and with their descendants. And this was critical for piecing together evolutionary history. This was piecing together a fossil record. I remember hearing about Archaeopteryx a long time ago in college. He was such an important find because he explained the transition between birds and dinosaurs. We always knew there was a connection, but never had any real proof until he was found. You can see in this fossil right here to the right hand side where the feather imprint of fossils was just beautiful. We could see that there were feathers. I remember hearing about Archaeopteryx while in college, and it was just an amazing find. Here we have a specimen that is reptile yet has feathers. If you look at him, you can see his fossilized feather impressions real easily in this one. I think to date we're at 12 Archaeopteryx fossils. The most complete ones are, I think, in Europe and Germany. Now, his fossil looks more of a small reptile, jaws, and if you look at his claws, he had 3 clawed feet. But he is definitely predicted to have been able to fly, the size of a relatively larger flying bird. We see evidence of morphology in homologous structures. These are structures that suggest evidence of a common ancestor. They're very similar in structure, but they have a different function. This is used to being, this is because it's due to a different environment, and so it has a different need. It's also a result of divergent evolution. So if we look here at the human hand, the cat arm, the horse leg, the bat wing, and the dolphin fin, we see resemblance of identical bone structures in all of these creatures, which is evidence that we all had a common ancestor that had similar structures. It's just over time, human hands evolved humeruses that were greater in length than in a dolphin. They're more fused and non-jointed. Yet in a bat, they have great motion span, and in a cat, they're very, very thick and strong. Not only do we see it in homologous structures, but we see this evidence in vestigial structures as well. These are structures that we still have, but they don't really have any function at all. It could be left over from some ancestor that used to have that structure, and we never lost the DNA programming for it. And so, this is important because it provides evidence of this divergent evolution, how we were together. You could think of an ostrich. It is definitely related to birds, yet it is a flightless bird. If you look at the difference between an ostrich and an emu, we see this vestigial structure of wings in two separate species. At one point, there were ancestors definitely that found them very useful, but they have become vestigial. For evidence of morphology, we see those in analogous structures as well. These are structures that have evolved independently, completely different organisms, but they serve the same purpose. So if you look at the wings of a dragonfly and the wings of an owl, These organisms are not closely related at all, very far apart on our phylogenetic tree here, but yet they both have wings. They're very similar structures and they serve the same purpose of flight. So different structurally, but same functionality. And this is just really due to living in similar environments and having to fulfill the same niche. It's a result of convergent evolution, and therefore it's not related to each other. We can look in the field of biogeography for even more evidence. So, this is really what Darwin was looking at. It was the distribution of organisms that have lined up with the discovery of this continental drift and, of course, the original Pangea, the original large supercontinent. Species in nearby geographical areas often resemble each other, but they have some variations, and that has a lot to do with their environment. Darwin noticed this when he was on the mainland of Ecuador and then went to the Galapagos Islands. The island species themselves are more closely related to the animals that were on the mainland, those species, than the actual island species. Different species living on the island were related to themselves. And this is what we call potential evidence of divergent evolution. Endemic species, they exist only in one geographical region, like the Galapagos turtles, for example. But this provides us evidence that at one point the species, they all lived on the mainland, and then they got to the islands. They were so isolated for so long that they evolved different features or morphological looks. We also see evidence of evolution in embryology, similarities in embryos, especially of vertebrates. Way early on in development suggests that suggests a common ancestry amongst all vertebrates. We all look very, very similar in very early on in development, up until about 9 weeks for humans, and everybody else earlier on. We see that everyone starts off looking very similar. You can see the gill structures on fish, reptile, humans, and even birds are present, even though only one of those organisms is going to keep those gills when they are born. We also see more evidence in biochemistry, now with DNA technology, which wasn't around in Darwin's time to be able to provide good evidence or good backup of his theories. We now can analyze DNA and proteins from all different species all around the planet and compare them, use similarities to predict ancestry, common ancestral organisms. We can see how closely related species would have similar DNA sequencing to each other. We can also see pseudogenes, which is interesting. They provide evidence of divergent evolution. And then remember, I had said there's a lot of non-coding DNA. You want to think about these non-functional genes as vestigial, right? Vestigial things that code for structures in your DNA, things that we don't need anymore, but they still appear. When we compare mammals that live on land or mammals that live in water, we notice that their DNA comparison sequence is very, very similar, with only a few nucleotides that are different amongst each other. Hence the hippopotamus versus the humpback whale DNA sequencing comparison. We also see more evidence of evolution from just direct observation. Microevolution is one of the fastest ways to see evolution happen right in front of your eyes. It happens as a direct observation in current population that's living on the planet, like bacteria. And we see that if something has a short life cycle, like bacteria that reproduces really quickly, we can see rounds and rounds of evolution very quickly. Like the peppered moths, even though they took seasonal cycles and it took some data gathering amongst different countries to notice that there was evidence of evolution there. Their life cycle is definitely a lot faster than like a hippo. We also see it in mosquitoes as they build resistance and tolerance to pesticides like DDT very quickly because they have a short life cycle. And even MRSA, which has now an antibiotic resistant bacteria. And this is why evolution becomes so important to us, is because it's how we learn about human disease, in addition to just how butterflies evolve with flowers and such. But we're more interested in this when it comes to human health. Basically, as we have a bunch of different types of antibiotics that are distributed amongst people, um, those antibiotics restrict the reproduction of bacteria, and then it restricts the reproduction of the bacteria that are weaker, leaving the stronger ones available, and the stronger ones survive. The stronger ones that survive go on to reproduce, and they will often have these antibiotic resistant genes in them. And so now we've created a round of evolution, and we've created antibiotic resistant bacteria like MRSA.